The Watcher in the Window. In the early 2000s, there was a small town in the Midwest that prided itself on its tight-knit community and peaceful atmosphere. Among the rolling hills and sprawling cornfields, the townspeople went about their lives, blissfully unaware of the chilling tale that would soon become a part of their history. It all started when the Thompson family moved into the old, creaky house on Maple Street. The house had been vacant for years, its previous owners having mysteriously vanished one night, leaving everything behind. The Thompsons were a young couple, John and Sarah with their 10-year-old daughter, Emily. They were excited about their new start in this quaint town. And the house, despite its eerie past, seemed perfect for them. As they settled in, strange things began to happen. At first it was just little things. Doors creaking open on their own, cold drafts where there shouldn't be any, and the feeling of being watched. Emily, being the imaginative child she was, started talking about the man in the window. She claimed he watched her at night from the window across her room. John and Sarah dismissed it as a child's wild imagination, fueled by the change and the old house's spooky atmosphere. But Emily insisted. She described the man in detail, tall with a gaunt face and hollow eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. She said he wore old-fashioned clothes and stood completely still, just staring at her. It wasn't long before John and Sarah began to worry about their daughter's vivid descriptions. They checked the window every night, but there was never anyone there. One particularly stormy night, Sarah was woken by the sound of Emily screaming. She and John rushed to their daughter's room, only to find her sobbing and pointing at the window. "He's here! He's here!" she cried. The couple looked out the window, but again saw nothing. John decided to install security cameras around the house, hoping to put an end to the growing tension. Days turned into weeks, and the footage revealed nothing out of the ordinary. Until one night. It was around 3 a.m. when the camera in Emily's room caught something. A figure, tall and gaunt, appeared at the window. It just stood there, staring into the room, just as Emily had described. John and Sarah watched the footage in horror, unable to explain what they were seeing. The figure didn't move, didn't blink. It just watched, determined to get to the bottom of this. John stayed up every night, watching the monitors. On the third night, he saw it again. The same figure standing at the window, its hollow eyes fixated on Emily's bed. John grabbed a flashlight and ran outside, but by the time he reached the spot, the figure was gone. Terrified and desperate, the Thompsons reached out to the town's historian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Whitaker. She listened to their story with a grave expression, and then told them about the house's dark past. Decades ago, a man named Henry Blackwood lived there. He was known to be a recluse, obsessed with the supernatural. One night he vanished without a trace, and soon after, strange occurrences began to plague the house. Some said he had made a deal with dark forces, and his spirit was bound to the property, forever watching, forever waiting. Mrs. Whitaker suggested they leave the house immediately, but John and Sarah were determined to confront whatever was haunting their home. They enlisted the help of a local paranormal investigator who set up equipment throughout the house. That night, they held a seance, hoping to communicate with the entity. As they gathered in Emily's room, the temperature dropped drastically. The investigator called out to the spirit, asking it to reveal itself. For a moment there was silence. Then the window fogged up and slowly words appeared, written from the outside. "Leave." The Thompsons didn't need any more convincing. They packed their belongings and left that very night. The house on Maple Street remains abandoned to this day, a dark reminder of the watcher in the window. And if you ever find yourself in that small, Midwestern town, don't be surprised if you hear whispers about the house where Henry Blackwood still watches, waiting for his next unsuspecting victim. The vanishing house. There's a house in my neighborhood that doesn't exist. Or at least, that's what everyone says. You can't find it on Google Maps. The county records don't list it. Neighbors claim they've never seen it. But I know it's there. I've been inside. It all started when I was 12. My friend Jake dared me to explore the old house at the end of Elm Street, the one everyone said was haunted. We'd heard the stories, kids who went in and never came out, strange noises at night, the works. But being 12 and invincible, we decided to go for it. The house was a dilapidated Victorian, the kind with peeling paint and windows so dirty you couldn't see through them. We approached it on a chilly October evening, the kind of evening when the wind seems to whisper secrets. The door creaked open with a push, revealing a dark, musty interior. Jake had brought a flashlight, and its beam cut through the darkness, illuminating cobwebs, broken furniture, and a thick layer of dust. We explored room after room, finding nothing but eerie silence and shadows. Then we found the basement. The stairs creaked under our weight as we descended into the darkness. The air grew colder, and an unsettling feeling washed over me. At the bottom, the flashlight flickered and died. We were plunged into darkness. Suddenly, the room was bathed in a sickly green light. We saw a figure in the corner, its eyes glowing. Jake screamed and bolted up the stairs. I followed, but the basement door slammed shut, trapping me inside. The figure moved closer, and I saw it was an old man. His face twisted into a grotesque grin. "You shouldn't have come here," he rasped. I backed into a wall, heart pounding. He raised a hand, and everything went black. When I woke up, I was outside, lying on the front lawn. Jake was gone, and the house looked as abandoned as ever. I ran home, too scared to look back. The next day, I tried to find Jake, but he was gone. His parents claimed they never had a son. No one in the neighborhood remembered him. It was as if he'd never existed. The house at the end of Elm Street was still there, but now no one else could see it. It was as if the house itself had erased Jake from existence. Years later, I still dream of that house. Sometimes I see Jake inside, his face twisted like the old man's, warning me to stay away. I don't go near Elm Street anymore, but I know the house is still there, waiting for its next victim. So if you ever find yourself on Elm Street and see a house that doesn't exist, turn around and leave. Some doors should never be opened. The silent forest. In the early 2000s, there was a small town nestled deep within the Pacific Northwest. This town, Evergreen Pines, was surrounded by a dense forest that the locals rarely ventured into. It wasn't just because of the thick, almost impenetrable undergrowth, but because of the stories that had been passed down through generations, stories of disappearances and strange noises, stories that chilled the bones of even the bravest of souls. One summer, a group of teenagers decided to spend their break investigating the forest. They were skeptical of the tales and believed they were nothing more than ghost stories meant to scare children. Their leader, Jake, was the most confident. "There's nothing out there," he would say. "Just old wives' tales." They set out on a warm July morning, equipped with camping gear, food, and a couple of flashlights. The deeper they went, the more they felt an eerie presence. The birds stopped singing and the air grew cold. They laughed it off, attributing it to their imaginations. Nightfall came quickly in the forest. They set up camp, lighting a fire to keep warm and cook their dinner. As they sat around the fire, telling jokes and stories, they heard it. A whisper, faint at first, barely audible over the crackling of the fire, but it was there. "Did you hear that?" Sarah, the quietest of the group, asked. The others dismissed it, thinking it was the wind or some animal in the brush. As the night went on, the whispers grew louder and more insistent. It sounded like many voices speaking in hushed tones, just out of understanding. The teenagers felt a growing unease, but were too proud to admit they were scared. Jake suggested they turn in for the night, hoping to sleep off their fear. But sleep did not come easy. The whispers seemed to surround them, pressing in from all sides. Jake, unable to take it anymore, got up to investigate. "I'm going to prove there's nothing out there," he said, flashlight in hand. He walked a few feet from the camp and vanished into the darkness. Minutes passed, then hours. Jake did not return. The whispers grew louder and more frantic. Sarah and the others huddled together, too terrified to move. As dawn approached, the whispers suddenly stopped. The silence was deafening. They searched for Jake at first light, but found no trace of him. His flashlight lay abandoned on the forest floor, its beam pointing towards a gnarled old tree. Carved into the bark were words they couldn't understand, written in a language that felt ancient and malevolent. Panicking, they fled the forest, vowing never to return. When they reached the safety of their town, they tried to tell the adults what had happened, but no one believed them. Jake was declared missing, and the forest was deemed off limits. Years passed and the group grew older, each trying to forget that night, but they never did. The whispers haunted their dreams, and Jake's disappearance remained a painful mystery. Evergreen Pines slowly became a ghost town, its residents moving away, unable to shake the feeling of dread that lingered. The forest, however, remained. It watched, it waited, and sometimes when the wind blew just right, it whispered. Decades later, a group of hikers stumbled upon an old campsite deep within the forest. Among the overgrown brush and decaying tents, they found a tree with strange markings. As they deciphered the carvings, they realized it told a story of whispers, of disappearances, and of a forest that was very much alive.